Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I got a little derailed on my podcasting. We were going to do a campfire podcast like we did back in February. My buddy Josh and I did one back in February when we were out camping in the Catskills at Burnt Rossman State Forest. And we were out camping this weekend. We were back up at Holmes Lake, which we had camped out once before, 2 Aprils ago. So not last year, the year before. And that time we were joined by our buddy Dustin. And this time Dustin came along with us as well. And we left Friday morning, had a pretty good day on Friday. And then it just rained all night, Friday night into Saturday morning. The temperatures got real cold. We weren't really prepared for that. We were prepared for rain, but the temperatures got real cold. The trail got real muddy and flooded out. And we were just concerned about staying warm, about enjoying ourselves, and about getting the truck off the mountain coming home with all the rain. So we decided to call the trip short. And the first time we've ever done that. I mean, we've camped in the snow, we've camped in the rain before, cold, hot, you name it. But this trip, it just the stars didn't align for us. So we had a really great first night, good campfire, and met this cool guy, Gabe, who was at our lean-to. When we got there, he was in the lean-to the day before. He built up huge barricades, or as Dustin called them, barricades, cleverly enough. He was there solo camping. He was waiting for his friends. His friends decided not to come in because of said rain and cold. So he ended up staying there Thursday night by himself. And to ward off the bears, he built these barricades. I'll put a photo up, but he built these barricades on either side of the lean-to and kind of put crisscrossing tree branches over the front of the lean-to to kind of deter the bears. Don't blame him. If I was there by myself, I probably would have done the same thing. But he was real cool guy, nice guy. And he was leaving that day. So we got the lean-to and we had a great campfire that night. I was a little too tired to record an episode that night. I figured I'll do it tomorrow night. Second night, we're usually a little bit more amped up and energized, and we got rained out. So this week, I figured I would talk a little bit about just Bigfoot sightings in that area of Holmes Lake, which is in Fulton County. I wanted to have Josh and Scott on the show, Josh Diaz, Scott Perry, Josh, who came with me on this trip, and Scott Perry, who's been on the show many times before. These guys love talking to them about Bigfoot, but they were both indisposed at the time of this recording. So I'm doing it solo this week. Before I go any further, I just wanted to give a shout out to my buddy Dan and his wife, Tanya. Tanya had some emergency surgery a few days ago, and she's recovering. She's doing well. But Dan, Tanya, just wanted to wish you guys well, let you know you're in our prayers, you're in our thoughts, and wish you and the boys everything good coming up, and hope Tanya has a speedy recovery. Dan had actually made chili and jerky for our trip, and he was supposed to come on the trip with us, but because of the emergency situation, he couldn't come. So Dan, we missed you, buddy. But there's always next time. So Dan, Tanya, we're thinking about you. Okay, so another shout out I want to give is to my buddy Andy over at Spooky Island Radio. He's got his new season is out, Spooky Island Radio season 3. He just did some Tower of London ghost stories, and he spoke with his friend Olivia from the Is This Place Haunted podcast. So pretty cool stuff. He reviewed the movie Slender Man, which we were just talking about 2 episodes on this podcast. So go give Andy a listen over at Spooky Island Radio. I'll put links in the description below. He's a good guy, and listen to his podcast on the way up to the camping trip. So it was a good road trip podcast to listen to. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit more about Holmes Lake, just where we camped this weekend. I'm going to share my screen. Just so if you're watching on YouTube or on Spotify, you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So here's Holmes Lake. It's probably more of a pond, but they call it a lake. It's not a little pond. It's a very large pond, but it's called Holmes Lake, and it's in the Shaker Mountain Wild Forest. It's just northeast of Caroga Lake, which you can see here. We're going to talk about that today. And just like northwest of Great Sacandaga Lake. So in Fulton County. And here it is. And if I zoom in, you can kind of see little remnants of an old beaver dam here. We had crossed this, walked over this, and we hiked the perimeter of the lake. We walked all the way around the lake. And on the north side here, there's a couple of campsites. We saw a lot of deer sign, a lot of deer scat. We saw bear prints, bear scat. So this side of the lake seems very active. It didn't look like it had been camped in a little bit. Our lean-to was on the south side of the lake, just a little bit south of the lake, not very far from the shoreline. But we kind of set up our chairs right in this area, right on the south shore, near this beaver dam here. And that's where we would sit and have our beers. And I smoked a few cigars. And we had a great time the first day. Our buddy Pete came in and met with us. He had a few beers as well. So he couldn't stay overnight, but he stayed with us. And like I said, we were down at the lean-to. We camped the first night. It was a little chilly the first day, very windy on the lake, sunny, some clouds in the skies, but not the best weather. It was a little chilly. We saw some osprey. We saw some ducks. We saw some loons. We heard some owls at night. I can actually put a few clips of that in here just so you guys can hear what the owls sounded like. A little unearthly. Owls can sound a little creepy at night if you don't know what they are.
They're all over. Yeah. Communicating to each other. There's another one.
So that was really cool to hear the owls. The spring peepers were out. We didn't hear any other animals. No bears came by, which was nice. You always want to avoid bears if possible. And sleeping was cold. The lean-to was very drafty. We put up a tarp in front of the lean-to just to block some of the wind, but it didn't help much. But great trip nonetheless. Love hanging out with Josh and Dustin. So hope to have Josh on again soon, and Scott Perry again too. And Scott, we need to take you out camping. So if you're listening, buddy, you got to come out with us sooner or later. We're going to drag you out there, do some Bigfoot hunting, and hopefully record a podcast episode like I wanted to do this week. So let me move on to the stories now. And before I proceed, again, another disclaimer. I'm getting these stories from the BFRO website, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is the site, the group started by Matt Moneymaker of Finding Bigfoot fame. And there's a lot of controversy with the BFRO, and I'm not going to get too much into it, but there's a lot of controversy there. I don't want to get into the drama. Again, just like with Finding Bigfoot, I'm not so much interested in the show as a whole as far as their investigations go. I always like the show more for just the personal stories, the people from the town hall and just people in the town, whatever town they were visiting, those people would have stories and tell their stories. And I was always much more interested in that than Bobo going into the woods and beating on drums or playing whale song and trying to call Bigfoot in. I mean, cool stuff to watch, but I always preferred the personal stories here. And same thing with the BFRO website. I prefer just reading what people submit. That's always interesting to me. The results, the investigations, I sometimes have issues with, and mainly there was actually one story years ago. My wife and I were going up towards Rhinebeck, New York, and there was a local story from there on the BFRO website, and we said, let's drive around the area and just see what we can find. It'd be pretty cool to go to this place where this guy had this sighting. We're going to be right there. So we did. And the surroundings did not match really what the investigator had said. You know, the investigators sort of talked about, this is prime Sasquatch territory, and you could easily see a Bigfoot kind of, approaching this person's house. And when we were there, it was a neighborhood. I mean, there wasn't a lot of cover. It was not the city for sure by any means, but it really wasn't how the investigator described it. And again, this wasn't a report from 40 years ago or 30 years ago. It was a fairly recent report, and it just did not really match what the investigator had said. So there can be some bias. What's squatchy for one person is not necessarily really squatchy for others. And for us, my wife and I were just like, no, I'm not saying that a Bigfoot couldn't come into this neighborhood, but it didn't offer the cover that the investigator of this story from the BFRO had indicated. So I always take these things with a grain of salt. And again, I'm more interested in the actual user submitted story, the witness story, than what the investigator from the BFRO says. So I'm going to dive into a few of these. So let me just move this over so I can actually open it. So from Fulton County, there's 3 reports. So the first one I'm going to talk about is one from near Caroga Lake, which we drove by yesterday. We drove by on the way in camping, on the way out camping. And as I showed you guys on the screen at Holmes Lake, I'll go to that again. Caroga Lake is not that far from Holmes Lake. So I just thought it'd be pretty cool to talk about these stories of possible Bigfoot in the area. Again, when we were at Holmes Lake both times now, we've experienced nothing. It's been dead quiet at night, not even squirrels or like rodents. I mean, all we hear are birds, the owls at night, the spring peepers, which are frogs. And again, we saw ducks and loons. We didn't hear any loons. We just heard the owls at night. So let me open this report. So this is from 2004. It's a Class B. And on the BFRO website, Class A basically is the better sort of sighting. It's usually like a daytime sighting or a very clear sighting of a Bigfoot, or just really good evidence, like very clear footprints, things like that. Class B is usually vocalizations, possible sighting, a fleeting glimpse, a nighttime kind of blurry sighting. So it's not as good of a sighting, not as clear, but still, an alleged sighting nonetheless. So this one is a Class B, and this is from the summer of 2004. So let me open this, and we'll talk about this. So I'll read this for you. It's on the screen too if you're watching. So this is from 2004. It just says summer. Fulton County, nearest town is Caroga Lake. Nearest road is 29. So I'll read this. Observed. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and me and a buddy were driving up to Caroga Lake on Route 29 when my headlights caught something crossing the road in the distance. When we got close enough to see whatever it was cross the guardrail like it wasn't even there and proceeded to walk into the woods. I couldn't tell what color it was, but it was big. We went back the next day, and my buddy, who is 6'2", tried to cross the guardrails, and he had trouble doing it. So I would have to say it was at least 7 feet tall. Twice around the same area, a couple of years apart, we heard a loud whirling sound like we've never heard before. So they're saying it was 1:30 in the morning, cloudy, warm, but very dark out. So it's a very wooded area with a lot of streams and swamps. So again, this doesn't give the exact place of where it happened. It was just near Caroga Lake on Route 29. So the follow-up investigation. I spoke to EP over the phone, and he didn't have much to add to this report. He and his friend were driving up Route 29 at about 1:30 in the morning next to Caroga Lake when they spotted a, quote, tall, big, dark figure, end quote, ahead of them, which stepped easily over the guardrail and into the adjacent woods. The friend told EP that he thought that it was covered with hair, and the only other feature they saw was that it walked with swinging arms, quote. They did not stop the car since both were convinced that what they had seen was a Bigfoot and that they were shaken by the sighting. EP said that he spotted the upright figure from approximately 100 yards away in the outskirts of his headlights. Because of the distance, he could not describe any other features. The guardrail, which was estimated to be about 3.5 feet tall, was later visited by EP and his 6'2" friend, and his friend had difficulty in stepping over the rail as easily as the upright figure. EP stated that he guessed the creature to be over 7 feet tall. One side of the road borders Caroga Lake and is interspersed with some swampy areas, creeks, and forests. The other side of the road borders the Adirondack Park Preserve and is heavily forested. The whole area is sparsely populated except for some small housing complexes that border the lake. EP stated that there was a Bigfoot sighting near there a couple of years ago. He also stated that he had heard whoops in the area at other times. EP was forthright and did not attempt to embellish what he saw. He remained adamant that what he and his friend witnessed was a Bigfoot. So this story, I like stories like this. Fleeting glimpse. He's not embellishing. He's not, talking about the eye color and how many teeth it had. And it just seems like they were legit just driving and saw something cross the road, and it could have been a man. And I like that the witness did try to go back and debunk it. He had a tall friend. I mean, I'm 6'1", so his friend was 6'2", a little taller than me. having trouble stepping over the guardrail. So if this was a man, it had to be a fairly big man. Pretty cool. I mean, Caroga Lake has some activity near it. There's stores, there's people living there, but it's not overly populated. I could definitely see this happening. So very cool that it happened close to where we camped this weekend and 2 years ago. Again, we didn't see anything, didn't see any footprints, didn't hear anything besides the owls. And just as a note, those owls can sound freaky if you don't know what they are. And Dustin was even saying at one point, one of the owls was making a sound and it sounded like monkeys.
It's not like fucking monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just had a very monkey-like, sort of sound. And it was clearly an owl, but you get people in the woods who don't know what owls sound like or are not familiar with the wildlife. It can sound like a Bigfoot. We called back to them, just similar owl calls, and they would respond to us. And that was very cool, but no whoops, no hoots and howls from a Bigfoot or anything that sounded like a Bigfoot. If these guys are from the area, they probably know the difference between an owl and something else. So very cool story with this one. So I'll move on to the second story. So this one is a Class A. Happened in 1998, summer, in August. Date 25th to 30th, also Fulton County. So location details. Okay, from Johnstown, New York, and Josh used to live in Johnstown. Take Perry Street north to Maple Avenue, turn left on Maple, and follow till you reach West Fulton Extension. Turn left there. This becomes North Bush Road. The dead end is off North Bush right before the old Red Barn. Again, this is from 1998. The area could have changed a lot since then. But again, nearest town is Caroga Lake. So very interesting. So I'll read their story. Observed. My best friend and I were driving around one night about 2 a.m. We ended up on a little used dead-end road. We were out of the vehicle to relieve ourselves, hence the dead end with no houses on it. We were in the middle of nowhere, but why take chances of getting spotted? We finished up our business, and I was back in the truck waiting for my buddy. I turned on the headlights, and illuminated in the beams was a very tall, man-shaped animal, brown in color. It stood perfectly still for a minute and then grunted at us. Then it turned and walked away. It didn't move like a man. It kind of swaggered back and forth like it lunged each leg forward when it walked. We were really freaked out, so we backed up all the way to the road. Afterward, we rationalized that it must have been a moose, but I don't think it was. For starters, I've seen moose before, and they're huge. This was tall enough. It looked well over 6 feet, but it stood on 2 legs, and it didn't have antlers. But at the time, we had to rationalize what we saw. My father is an officer with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He says that what we saw was a moose. It could not have been a Bigfoot, but it could not have been a Bigfoot, but I disagree. I went back and searched for moose tracks. None. Droppings, none. But rabbit. In fact, I found no tracks of any kind. But that doesn't mean anything because the ground is all soft needles and leaves. Also noticed, I went back the next day and found no tracks or droppings to identify my creature as a moose or bear, the only large animals in my area. Other witnesses, me and a friend. We were driving around for about an hour before the sighting, if you will. Before that, we had a midnight meal at a diner in Fultonville. Other stories. I've heard of sightings in Benson, which is also kind of close to Holmes Lake, so interesting for me. About an hour north of me, but I'm not sure I believe those stories. If you want details on them, I can provide at request. Time and condition. About 2 a.m., very clear night, stars in the sky. It was chilly and very well lit. I had my high beams on. Environment, mostly maple and oak, some pine. The area had been logged many years ago, so most of the forest is under 75 years old. I'm sure there's a creek running somewhere through there too. So this one's interesting. Again, moose, it could have been, but I understand the rationalization. You're trying to say, what could this have been? And I appreciate that. I appreciate people not just jumping to, oh, it's Bigfoot. But sometimes you see what you see. And if these guys are seeing a tall man-shaped figure and it had no antlers and it's on 2 legs and it walks like a man and looks like a man, then you're going to go for the Bigfoot explanation. And of course, skeptics are going to say, you saw a moose, you saw a bear. But again, these guys seem local. They seem to know what a moose looks like, what a bear looks like, and it wasn't that. There is a lot of leaf litter in the Adirondacks, I will admit. I mean, where we were, unless you were right down by the water or there was a clear sort of patch where there was some mud, it would have been hard to see prints. We saw some deer prints, we saw some bear prints, much more scat than prints. So lots of leaf litter there. So pine needles, leaves, moss. There's a ton of that stuff out there. So it can be hard to actually see prints. So I'll read the follow-up investigation to this from the BFRO. Spoke with the witness, Chris. Witness is very familiar with the wildlife of the area. Subject had not been drinking that night and were under the legal drinking age in New York at the time of the sighting. Witness was approximately 20 feet from the creature in the driver's side of the vehicle. States approximately 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in long brown hair. Described the face as being flat. Arms swung more than a human. Stated it just turned around after approximately a minute and walked off. Met with the witness on July 10th, 2003, went to the area of the sighting, which is no longer a dead-end road. As I mentioned, it kind of changed a little bit. Visual evidence where the road ended at one time. Okay, I don't understand that. Interesting fact is approximately 300 yards behind the wooded area, there is a town dump. There is plenty of evidence in the area of deer, as we found deer track and droppings. The witness is straightforward and is extremely convincing. Again, another interesting story. I do think it's interesting that it took the creature a while after being in the high beams to kind of turn around and grunt at them. Again, that could just be an artifact from being startled, from being scared of seeing this thing. And, was it a minute? Was it 2 seconds? Sometimes time slows down. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that. Again, I'm not saying he definitely saw a Bigfoot, but again, another interesting story that doesn't seem to have over embellished details. Just a quick sighting, clear sighting from what it sounds like, but also very quick and nothing spectacular about it. It's not unbelievable to think that these guys saw something. They were on a desolate part of the road, no people there, tall creature, and it was in the high beam, so they had lights on it. It wasn't something they were seeing in the dark or, illuminated by the moon or starlight or anything like that. So it seems like a pretty legit sighting on their part. Okay, so we'll move on to the third story now, and this one goes back quite a few years. This one is from 1966, so this is a Class B. Man recalls childhood observation, large tracks with long stride in snow near Mayfield. So the year was 1966. It was in the winter. He's saying the date was January 15th, 1966. I don't know if that's 100% accurate or if he's just estimating. Again, Fulton County, nearest town is Mayfield. Nearest road is New York State Route 30. Observed in January or February of 1966, so he was estimating, as I said, my father and I observed very large tracks in the snow. Each track was about 15 to 16 inches in length and about 7 to 8 inches in width. They were very widely spaced, about 12 to 14 feet, as if made by something running. We followed them for a short distance, however. The snow was patchy and we lost the trail. Our sighting was in Mayfield, New York, behind Knowles Market. New York State Route 30 now passes exactly over the spot, so you can't even go back to the exact spot anymore. At the time, I was an 11-year-old boy and had never heard of Bigfoot. Years later, when I read about sightings in the Pacific Northwest, I realized what I had seen as a lad. Other witnesses, 2 witnesses. We were rabbit hunting. This was midday. It was sunny. It was cold. Follow-up investigation. The witness does not remember many details, but recalls a series of 6 to 8 tracks in the snow. It was during a warming period in either January or February, so they could not follow the tracks very far in the melting snow. The witness recalls a site as near Exit 28 North, near the intersection of Route 30A and 30. So this one, I have a few issues with. I'm not discounting it completely, but anytime you have footprints in snow, that becomes a little problematic because there's melt, there's refreeze, there's melt again. So you have to worry about the snow melt, and that is a big issue. Also, snow is fairly soft, so something jumping through the snow can, make a much bigger print than it appears to be. The stride here seems a little weird. 12 to 14 foot stride with a 15 to 16 inch footprint seems very long. And that's interesting. It doesn't seem right, but it's also what kind of small animal could jump 12 to 14 feet? I don't know. That's interesting to me. It doesn't say really here what the footprints looked like. Just they saw footprints. They didn't think Bigfoot. They didn't think person, from what I can read here. Also, he was 11 years old. I think memory can change a little bit or be sort of influenced when you're a child. Things are always bigger when you're a kid. You ever go back to your old kindergarten class or your third grade classroom, and what used to seem like a huge cavernous room is now tiny with tiny little desks. And at the time when you're a kid, everything just feels much bigger. So I don't know if that's coming into play here, where this person is remembering something as being bigger than it was. I don't know if they mentioned it. They're saying it was about 15, 16 inches in length, about 7, 8 inches wide. Did they actually measure it? Are they going off of memory? Are they going off estimations? Because the human brain can't always be great at measuring. I mean, some people are great at it. Some people can look at something and be like, yeah, that's 1.5 feet long. And then other people, something can be 10 feet away and they're like, oh, that's 3 feet. So very tough to sort of give this much credence, but it is in an area where there's other stories and sightings. None on the BFRO website. I just don't see any other ones here, but thought these were interesting, just that they happened near to where we were. Okay, so I wanted to do a few more stories. This is from a different area in the Adirondacks. This is from Hamilton County. And Josh and I had camped in Hamilton County at a place called Ross Pond a couple of years back. And I'll put a link below to our podcast episode about that, where we encountered something in the woods. Something was staring at us. It was big. From what we could estimate, it was probably 8 feet tall. We're assuming it was a bear, but you just never know. So that was in the Hudson Valley Gorge Wilderness. And a couple of years ago, it was just a weird encounter. So I figured I'd pull up a few stories from that area as well, because there are more stories from there. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll go over a couple here. And you guys can go on the BFRO website and just check out Hamilton County if you want to read more. But I thought these two stories here were pretty cool. So let me go over these. So this one is from 2014. So not too long ago. Summer, July 11th. Location details. On Route 8, just outside of Wells, New York, near the Sacandaga River. There was a tree knocked down close to it and a yellow road sign shortly after. Wells, New York, near the Sacandaga River. So Wells, that's where I believe Small Town Monsters filmed around that area for their Whitehall, Beast of Whitehall documentary. I'll link to that down below as well. So Wells has, that whole area has a lot of sightings, of course, Whitehall and the Adirondacks in general. So let me talk about this story. Observed. I was driving home through the mountains from a concert last night on Route 8 in Hamilton County, New York, and at 12:37 a.m., I hit a creature, quotes, that was carrying a deer with my car. My car is damaged from the hood to the rear by this creature, and I know it is at least injured, and its DNA may be on my car. The speed limit was 55, and I was not able to stop in time. When I saw the creature, who was carrying a deer, about to step into the roadway, I hit the brakes, but was only able to slow down minimally before impact. I did not really believe in Bigfoot before last night, and I am still shaken up and have not been able to share the story with anyone. I wanted to stop and see if the creature was okay, but I was scared out of my wits to stop and get out of the car. The creature was huge, at least 7.5 feet tall. I've seen drawings and such of Bigfoot, and this creature looked similar, but had white around its hairline, and his fur was a dark brown, almost black. I'm shaking writing this, and I am in such disbelief that this happened to me. I can't even report the accident to the police, and I don't know what I will tell my insurance company. My car is totaled. The creature crushed my windshield wipers together, broke many pieces of the passenger side, and left smears of dirt and blood all over the rear window. Are the witnesses? No, just myself in the car. Other stories: I'm not from this area. I was driving home from a Brantley Gilbert concert at Turning Stone Casino in Verona, New York, to my home 3.5 hours away. So he doesn't say where he lives, but he's coming through the area. Time and conditions: 12:37 a.m. The moon was bright. The night was clear. No precipitation or fog in the area. So I'm going to talk about the follow-up investigation. So this is from the BFRO investigator. I met with the witness exactly 1 year after the incident. The car, which may have contained hair, blood, and tissue from the creature, was totaled by the insurance company and surrendered to them many months prior to our meeting. They were unable to locate any photos of damage as they were sent to the insurance company as well. The witness stated that she attended the concert alone and did not consume alcohol. She and I attempted to locate the accident scene but were unsuccessful. On her way home, she was able to identify the location and phone me with directions. While heading north on Route 8 out of Wells with the thick, dense woods to the east and the Sacandaga River to the west, I arrived. According to the witness, the creature was running from the wood line to the east of Route 8 toward the river on the west side. It was carrying a deer that appeared to be deceased in its outstretched arms when it ran out into the road in front of the approaching car. The front corner on the passenger side of the car hit the creature, and the creature slid down the side of the car, causing damage down the whole length of the vehicle. It's unclear if the deer did most of the damage or the creature. We were unable to locate any physical evidence at the scene. It was very overgrown, and between the snow plows in the winter and mowing in the summer, it was no surprise. I believe the witness to be very truthful, and it's probable the incident occurred as described. I've spent most summers as a child and teenager living in Wells and know it very well. The area is perfect for a large creature to survive, and there are many stories of encounters in Hamilton County and the Adirondacks as a whole. Absolutely. It's unfortunate that an investigator was not able to get in contact with the witness sooner to retrieve DNA from the car and investigate the accident scene when it was fresh. Unfortunately, the witness only supplied the email address when the report was submitted. Prior emails reaching out to her may have been lost or misplaced. It's really hard to imagine any native New York animal that would be able to carry a deer in its arms while running, let alone a person in a suit. The witness has never told anyone else about the incident until now, telling the insurance company and her family that she had hit a deer. This is a story I've heard before. People hitting a creature. Sometimes, I mean, not necessarily carrying a deer, but if they've hit something like a Bigfoot creature, they'll say, I had to tell the insurance company it was a deer. Like, they wouldn't believe me otherwise. It is sad that she couldn't hold on to the car or take some DNA from the car before surrendering it. I understand she couldn't wait a year, but that just does seem to be a shame. But yeah, if she's telling the truth, I can't imagine anything bipedal carrying a full deer in its arms, crossing the road at night. That just sounds a little weird to me. She does sound legitimately freaked out. She says she's not from the area. She was just driving through. So very interesting. And yeah, to get to the scene of the incident a year later, it's not ever really going to be helpful. I mean, getting there a day or two later is not really going to provide much usually. I mean, you're lucky if you get a footprint or something. So a year later, not surprised they didn't find anything. So another cool story. Again, not sure if it's true or not. Take everything with a grain of salt, but very interesting story. So here's another report. This is from 2010 in the fall, Hamilton County. Nearest town is Northville. And I've camped along the Northville Placid Trail, and allegedly there's a lot of Bigfoot activity along that. So another interesting story. So I'll read this one. Observed. My friend and I finished preparing for a big outdoors event, and we were sitting outside his home. It was around 11 p.m., and his wife and dog had gone inside for the evening. Across the road from his house, there is a large swamp that goes up to a small mountain. Our talk was cut short by an odd scream about 75 yards into the swamp on the right at ground level. I asked my friend, an avid hunter, what animal screams like that. He didn't know, but we talked that maybe it could be an owl or a fisher. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, owls can sound really freaky. Fishers, too. Fishers can sound like someone being murdered. I mean, just screaming and horrific. So Google a fisher call and you'll see what I'm talking about. A few minutes later, in the woods on our side of the road, a large animal broke a lot of dead branches all at once. It wasn't running, but seemed to have just turned around in one location. A minute or two later, three owls hooted between themselves at treetop level in the woods behind his house. The owls seemed to have been about 50 feet apart. We commented about this sudden weird activity when something came from the woods and landed in his yard behind us. We were still facing the road and didn't see the object, but I assume it was something around the size of a baseball. He doesn't have a manicured lawn, and it would be impossible to know exactly what it was. I've thought about this incident for a couple of months and could write it off the first three occurrences that evening, but the object landing in the yard made this event too much to ignore. My friend was as puzzled as I am. He lives where people are few and far between. Also noticed, my other friend and resident had told me that the deer were unusually scarce at this time because they usually eat his flowers and vegetables, and he hadn't seen many near his house. Other stories? No, I lived very close to this location from 95 until 2002. There's an abundant, diverse amount of wildlife there. Time and conditions: 11 p.m., clear to partly cloudy skies, warm enough and bug-free that I was wearing shorts and maybe a pullover. So there's this cool picture here, I guess, of where this happened. The witness called and we encouraged him to submit a report. I attended the BFRO expedition in the Adirondacks and I witnessed similar occurrences, all of which are very indicative of Sasquatch behavior. The friend had never experienced anything like this before, but did not make a habit of sitting outside his home at night. So there's this picture here. This one's interesting as well, mainly for the rock throwing. As was mentioned here, you know, the screams, you always have to be a little cautious about sounds coming from the woods. If you don't see what's making the scream or the howl or whatever sounds you're hearing, the tree knocks, whatever it is, you can't automatically assume it's Bigfoot. I know a lot of people go Bigfoot hunting in areas that are known to have Bigfoot, and they'll do a howl and then a howl comes back, or they'll do a tree knock and a tree knock comes back. And I'm always suspicious of that, because how do you know it's not just other Bigfoot hunters? This is a well-known Bigfoot hunting ground, and Salt Fork comes to mind, where people go out and they make whoops and they make the tree knocks, and every time without fail they're getting them back, and you're not seeing what's making these sounds. So how do you know it's not other humans just also looking for Bigfoot? You may not hear them talking to each other, but if they're screaming or if they're banging the wood, you're going to hear that, and you don't know if it's just other people. Maybe it's people messing with you. Maybe somebody just knows that people go Bigfoot hunting and they say, hey, let's go out, and anytime we hear a whoop or a tree knock, we'll answer it and just mess with them. So again, it doesn't mean it's not Bigfoot, doesn't mean Bigfoot doesn't exist, but you got to take it with a grain of salt. You got to just discount it. But the rock being thrown, that's always really interesting, because what in the woods can throw rocks at you? It's got to have an opposable thumb. It's got to have an arm where it can pick up a rock in its hand and throw it a long distance. So you're talking human or Bigfoot. And neither one of those is really comforting. Even if it's just a person throwing rocks at you, I mean, that's obviously not a balanced and stable person, especially in these communities where a lot of people have, you know, weapons. I mean, people go camping, people go hunting. If you're throwing rocks at a hunter, he's got a gun on him. You know, you're throwing rocks at campers. A lot of campers carry. So you're throwing rocks at somebody. That's not the smartest thing to do. So is it a person or is it Bigfoot? So another interesting story. I love, you know, having the photo taken at the location so you can kind of imagine it, and you can kind of see how far away the tree line is, and if something's being thrown, that's a little freaky. So I'm going to cut it off there for this week. I just thought those were some cool stories from the areas where we've camped, and hopefully I want to do this again. I want to get Scott and Josh on, because they're much more familiar with the areas up there, with the little towns and the lakes and just the terrain up there. And they may even know some local stories from up there that they can sort of contribute to. I'm just a city boy and talking about, you know, stories I found from nearby to where I camped. If you have a Bigfoot story and you want to share it, you want to come on the show, you just want to email it to me, jason@onanduntold.com. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you want to be on the show, you can be anonymous. I can hide your face. I don't have to share your full name. We can give you an alternate name, so you can come up with any name you like. Or if you do want to come on the show, I'd appreciate that too. Or if you just want to email it to me, just want to write it out, I'll read it on the air. And again, I can keep all your details anonymous and safe. So that's it for this week, everybody. Until next time, rock and roll.
Moon.